She performed naked in the Hippodrome, with geese plucking grain from her body. She was sold in a slave market for a low price. She scrubbed floors for the man who would try to force her into his bed. One became an empress and saint. Another became the only queen in Ottoman history. A third abolished slavery across an empire. These women weren't born to power, they were sold like property, used, discarded, but they refused to stay broken. Tonight we explore 5 women who went from auction blocks to thrones. If you're listening to this right now, chances are you're settling in for the night. Maybe you've got your favourite blanket. Maybe you're staring at the ceiling thinking about tomorrow. Perfect. That's exactly where you should be. I'm going to tell you stories that'll make you forget about whatever's stressing you out. Hit subscribe if these bedtime stories help you unwind. And hey, drop a comment. Where are you listening from? And what time is it right now? I'm curious how many of us night owls are out here together. Get comfortable. The auction block to the throne. Across 3 empires and 1,000 years, from 6th century Byzantium to 18th century Russia, we're about to trace the most impossible trajectories in human history. 5 women, 5 different centuries, each one starting at the absolute bottom of society's ladder. And here's what gets me about these stories. They're not fairy tales. Every detail is documented. Every transformation actually happened. We have their letters, their laws, their monuments. Real women who refused to accept that their birth circumstances would define their deaths. Think about what slavery meant for women in these ancient worlds. Your property. Someone owns your body, your time, your future. You exist for their pleasure, their convenience, their profit. Most slaves died as slaves. That was the system. That was reality for millions. But these 5, they saw something different in their reflections. They understood power in ways their owners never expected. They learned to read the men who thought they controlled them. And slowly, carefully, they began to turn the tables. First, there's Theodora, born around 500 AD in Constantinople. Her father kept bears for the Hippodrome's entertainment. When he died, her mother remarried quickly. They needed the money. By her teens, Theodora was performing in the circus, and I mean performing. The explicit shows that made her famous across the Byzantine Empire. Naked performances with animals that shocked even Constantinople's jaded crowds. She was the talk of the city, for all the wrong reasons, but she was building something, a reputation, name recognition, power. Then we have Roxelana. Around 1502, she's just a priest's daughter in some Ukrainian village, probably helping with church duties, learning to read, living a quiet life. Then the Crimean Tatars come raiding. They tear through her village like a hurricane, houses burning, families scattered. She's maybe 15 years old when they chain her up with the other captives. Long march to the slave markets of Istanbul, sold to the Ottoman palace. Another girl lost to history, right? Wrong. She becomes the only legal queen in Ottoman history. Balthild starts as an Anglo-Saxon girl around 641. Could have been noble-born, we're not sure. What we know is she's trafficked across the English Channel into Frankish territory, sold to a powerful lord named Urchinold. Big mistake for him, buying this particular girl. She's scrubbing his floors, yes, but she's also watching, learning. When he tries to force her into marriage, she disappears into the household staff until he gives up and marries someone else. Smart move, because King Clovis II is about to notice her. Catherine starts with basically nothing. Born around 1684 to Lithuanian peasants. Orphaned at 3. No family, no money, no prospects. Just another mouth nobody wants to feed. When Russia conquers Marienburg in 1702, she becomes a servant to some government official. Can't read, can't write. Picture this illiterate peasant girl somehow catching the eye of Peter the Great himself, the man who's literally rebuilding an entire empire. What did he see in her that made him throw away every rule of royal marriage? Here's what united all 5 of them. Beauty. Yes. Intelligence? Absolutely. But something else. This almost supernatural ability to read powerful men, to understand what they needed before they knew it themselves. These weren't women who seduced their way to power through looks alone. They became indispensable, political advisors, emotional anchors, the one person their emperor trusted completely. And once you become indispensable to the most powerful man in an empire, well, that's when interesting things start happening. But here's the question that keeps me up at night. How? How does a circus performer convince Justinian to rewrite Roman law? How does a Ukrainian slave girl become the only queen in 600 years of Ottoman history? How does an Anglo-Saxon servant abolish slavery across Francia? How does an illiterate peasant charm Peter the Great? These transformations are so extreme they sound impossible. Yet they happened, and their stories are about to show us exactly how the impossible becomes inevitable. Tonight we're going to walk through their worlds, feel the desperation of their early years, watch them learn the rules of survival, see the moments when opportunity cracked open just wide enough for them to slip through. From Constantinople's Hippodrome to Suleiman's harem to the courts of Francia and Russia. 5 women who proved that sometimes the path to ultimate power begins in the deepest humiliation, and that love, ambition, and sheer stubborn refusal to stay broken can literally reshape empires. Theodora's scandalous origins. Constantinople, around 500 AD. Picture the most notorious entertainment district in the ancient world. Now imagine a little girl watching her father wrestle bears in the Hippodrome for laughs and loose coins. That's where our future empress begins. Acosius wasn't just any bearkeeper. He was the bearkeeper for the Green faction. Politics and blood sport mixed together in ways that would make modern reality TV look tame. When he died suddenly, everything changed. His widow, 3 daughters, left with nothing but their wits and whatever talents they could sell. Theodora's mother did what desperate women do. She remarried fast, but the new husband, the Blues faction, wouldn't accept him as their bearkeeper. Politics again. So the family switched sides to the Greens. Young Theodora learned early that survival meant reading the room, picking the winning team, and never showing weakness. Her older sister Comito was already performing on stage, dancing, acting, whatever paid. In Constantinople's entertainment world, that line between performer and prostitute, it barely existed. Everyone knew what came next. The Byzantine stage wasn't Shakespeare. These were raunchy, explicit shows designed to shock and thrill. Think ancient world's version of adult entertainment, but performed in massive public venues. Theodora made her debut young, really young by today's standards. At first she just carried props for Comito, but audiences noticed her. That combination of beauty and fearlessness, the way she owned every moment on stage. By her teens she was getting her own acts, and that's when things got really wild. Here's what you need to understand about Constantinople. It was the most cosmopolitan city in the world. Merchants from India, scholars from Alexandria, diplomats from Persia, all watching these shows, all talking. Theodora didn't just perform, she created spectacles that had the entire empire gossiping. Her signature act, let's just say it involved geese, grain, and very little clothing. The details were so scandalous that historians centuries later still blushed writing about them. But that notoriety, it was her ticket to bigger stages. The moral guardians were horrified, of course. Church leaders denounced her. Aristocrats called her vulgar. But here's the thing about scandal in ancient times. It sold tickets. Theodora understood something that modern influencers know instinctively. Controversy equals attention, equals power. She wasn't just an actress anymore. She was a brand, a sensation. People travelled from across the empire just to see what outrageous things she'd do next, and she never disappointed them. But the lifestyle came with costs. The constant performing, the drinking, the parties that lasted until dawn. Theodora was burning bright and burning fast. She had affairs with powerful men, politicians, wealthy merchants. Some genuine, some calculated. In a world where women had few paths to influence, she was using every asset she had. Her wit was as sharp as her beauty. She could hold her own in conversations about philosophy, politics, anything. That combination was intoxicating to men used to dealing with wallflowers. The stories about her reached ridiculous proportions, some probably true, others clearly exaggerated by enemies or jealous rivals. But Theodora leaned into it all. Why fight the reputation when you can weaponize it? She was becoming legendary while still in her early 20s. The most infamous woman in the most powerful empire in the world. But underneath all that performance and scandal, something else was happening. She was getting tired of the constant spectacle, tired of being everyone's fantasy and no one's reality. Then came the pregnancy. The father? Probably some wealthy patron. But she never said. Having a child as an unmarried actress, it should have ended her career. Instead, it changed everything. Suddenly, she had someone else to think about. Someone who depended on her being more than just entertainment. The wild parties got old fast when you're responsible for a tiny human. For the first time in years, Theodora started thinking beyond the next performance, the next scandal, the next night. Around this time, she caught the attention of Hesebolas, a government official heading to Libya as governor. He wanted her as his mistress. Not unusual, powerful men often kept actresses. But this offer was different. A chance to leave Constantinople, to reinvent herself away from all the gossip and expectations. She said yes, packed up her life, her child, and headed for North Africa. What she found there would change everything. But that's where her real transformation begins. The relationship with Hesebolas went sour fast. Details are sketchy, but he basically abandoned her in Alexandria. Left her stranded with no money, no connections, and a child to feed. For most women, this would have been devastating. For Theodora, it was a wake-up call. She'd spent years building a reputation on scandal and sexuality. Now she needed something deeper, something that could sustain her when the looks faded and the audiences moved on to younger performers. In Alexandria, something extraordinary happened. This woman who had shocked an empire, who had made a living from her body and her scandal, began exploring questions about the soul, about redemption, about whether someone with her past could ever find peace. The details of her spiritual awakening are lost to history. But when Theodora finally returned to Constantinople, she was different, still beautiful, still intelligent, still magnetic. But now there was depth beneath the performance, and that combination, it would prove absolutely irresistible to a future emperor. Geese and grain, the Hippodrome of Constantinople, 50,000 people packed into stone seats, roaring their approval. This wasn't your typical circus act. This was Theodora, daughter of the bearkeeper, about to perform something so scandalous that Byzantine historians would struggle to describe it centuries later. Picture the scene, the massive arena, the smell of sweat and wine, the deafening crowd, and there she was, centre stage, about to do something that would make her the most talked about woman in the empire. Constantinople's entertainment scene was wild. Think Las Vegas meets ancient Rome, but with way fewer rules about what could happen on stage. Actresses doubled as courtesans. Performers pushed boundaries that would shock modern audiences. The Hippodrome wasn't just about chariot races. It was where society's moral limits got tested nightly. Theodora wasn't just participating in this world. She was redefining it, creating performances so outrageous they became urban legends. And the Geese and Grain Act, that was her masterpiece of scandal. Here's what happened. Theodora would appear on stage wearing almost nothing. Servants would scatter grain across her body. Then, geese, live geese, trained to peck the grain from her skin. The crowd went absolutely insane. This wasn't just entertainment, It was a deliberate provocation, a middle finger to Byzantine moral standards. She knew exactly what she was doing, every movement calculated for maximum shock value. The geese became symbols of her defiance. The grain represented abundance, fertility, pure theatre, designed to scandalize and captivate. The audience reaction was electric. Half the crowd shouted approval, the other half clutched their crosses in horror. Church officials condemned her from their pulpits the next morning. Wealthy patrons threw gold coins at her feet. Young men wrote love poems about the geese girl. Society ladies whispered her name in scandalized tones, while secretly envying her boldness. Theodora had achieved something remarkable: universal recognition. Everyone in Constantinople knew exactly who she was. Love her or hate her, you couldn't ignore her. Understanding Byzantine morality makes this even more shocking. This was a deeply Christian empire, where women were expected to be modest, silent, obedient. Public nudity was unthinkable for respectable women. Sexual display was reserved for the lowest classes. Yet here was Theodora, performing acts that challenged every social convention simultaneously. She wasn't just breaking rules, she was demolishing them with theatrical flair. The fact that she could do this and survive shows how entertainment culture operated outside normal social boundaries. Different rules for different worlds. But here's what gets me about Theodora. This wasn't desperation. This was strategy. She had options. She could have been a regular actress, stuck to conventional performances, made decent money. Instead, she chose the most controversial path possible. Why? Because controversy pays. Because outrage gets attention. Because in a city full of beautiful women, being shocking made her unforgettable. She understood something most people miss, that in the attention economy, being hated is better than being invisible. Pure calculated audacity. This is where Theodora gets really fascinating. By day, she's performing these scandalous acts. By night, she's studying philosophy, reading Christian texts, questioning her life choices. Contemporary accounts describe a woman wrestling with herself. The performer who shocked emperors and the seeker who wanted redemption. She wasn't just some wild party girl without depth. She was intelligent, conflicted, ambitious. The same mind that created the geese performance was analysing its moral implications. That internal tension, that's what made her extraordinary. Her reputation spread beyond Constantinople. Trade ships carried stories of the geese girl to Alexandria, Rome, even Persia. Diplomatic reports mentioned her performances. She became a symbol of Byzantine decadence to foreign courts. Christian moralists used her as an example of urban corruption. But here's the thing, that notoriety was power. Every emperor, every noble, every merchant prince in the known world had heard her name. She'd achieved something most people never do. She'd become a legend. And legends? Legends can reshape their own stories. The weight of her choices was crushing her, though. Success in the theatre world came with a price. The constant scrutiny, the judgment, the knowledge that her performances were both her liberation and her prison. She made incredible money, but couldn't buy respectability. She had fame, but not acceptance. Every morning brought the question, was this who she really wanted to be? The geese and grain had made her rich and famous, but they'd also defined her in ways that might be impossible to escape. Signs of change were showing. She started refusing certain performances, began questioning the morality of her acts, spent more time reading religious texts, and less time at after-show parties. The woman who'd built her career on shocking people was starting to shock herself. Friends noticed the shift. Fellow performers whispered about her growing seriousness. Even her audiences sensed something different. The wild energy was still there, but underneath, doubt was growing. Theodora was approaching a crossroads she didn't yet fully understand. As this chapter of her life reached its peak, Theodora stood at the center of a personal crisis that would reshape everything. The same intelligence that had made her Constantinople's most notorious performer was now questioning the path that had brought her fame and fortune. The geese and grain had given her power, but what kind of power was it really? As she prepared for what would become her final bow from the scandalous stage, Theodora was about to embark on a spiritual journey that would transform not just her life, but the entire Byzantine Empire. The conversion that changed everything. Alexandria, 522 AD. Theodora stands at the harbour, watching Constantinople disappear behind her. She's 22, carrying nothing but shame and a reputation that follows her like smoke. The explicit performances, the scandals, the whispers, all of it finally caught up. Her theatrical career is over. Not by choice, but by necessity. Here's what nobody expected though. What happened next in this ancient city of scholars and mystics would transform the bearkeeper's daughter into something entirely different. Someone capable of ruling an empire. Picture walking away from everything you've ever known. That's Theodora in Alexandria. No more stages, no more audiences screaming her name, the performances that made her notorious across the Byzantine Empire. Done. She's broke, alone, and for the first time since childhood, nobody's staring at her body. It's terrifying and liberating all at once. She finds lodging in the Christian quarter, a tiny room above a baker's shop. The smell of bread replaces incense and sweat. Silence replaces applause. And in that silence, something starts to shift inside her. The first time she hears Timothy preaching, she's not even looking for God. She's just lost. Timothy's a monophysite priest, which means he's teaching dangerous theology, the kind that gets you exiled if the wrong people hear it. But his words hit different. He's talking about redemption for the worst sinners, about God's love reaching the unreachable. Theodora sits in the back, hood up, trying to disappear, but when Timothy talks about Mary Magdalene, about how Christ welcomed the broken, her hands start shaking. This wasn't supposed to happen to someone like her. Monophysite Christianity teaches that Christ has one divine nature, not two. It sounds like theological hair-splitting, but it's actually revolutionary. If Christ is purely divine, then his love for sinners isn't human mercy, it's God himself reaching down. For someone like Theodora, who's been treated like property her whole life, this changes everything. She starts attending Timothy's secret gatherings, reading scripture for the first time, praying words she never thought she'd say. The woman who performed naked with geese is learning about grace. The transformation is impossible to explain. 3 months in Alexandria, and Theodora is unrecognizable. Not physically, spiritually. She wakes up praying instead of planning her next performance. She gives away her jewelry, keeping just enough to eat. She starts helping other women who fled Constantinople, girls running from the same life she escaped. There's this moment when she's washing a sick woman's feet, and she realizes something profound. This is the first time in her adult life she's touched someone without it being about survival or seduction. Her hands are finally clean. The change isn't just spiritual, it's everything. Theodora's learning to read properly, studying theology with an intensity that surprises everyone, including herself. She's asking questions that make Timothy pause and think. Her mind, which used to calculate survival strategies and crowd psychology, is now dissecting the nature of divine love. People notice. She's not performing anymore, but she's still magnetic. There's something about a former actress turned theologian that draws attention. Dangerous attention, actually, because word is starting to spread about the beautiful penitent studying with the heretical priest. Then Macedonia shows up. He's a Chalcedonian priest, which means he's on the opposite side of this theological war from Timothy. But he's also connected to powerful people in Constantinople, people who knew Theodora before. He comes to one of Timothy's gatherings, not to argue theology, but to see if the rumours are true. Is the infamous actress really here, studying heretical Christianity? When their eyes meet across the room, everything changes. Not romance, politics. Macedonia sees potential. A converted scandal could be very useful to the right patron back home. Macedonia's proposal is simple but brilliant. Return to Constantinople, not as an actress, but as a reformed woman with powerful theological knowledge. Someone who understands both the gutter and the gospel. The city is full of ambitious men who need wives with unusual backgrounds. Someone who can navigate any social situation, speak to any crowd, charm any audience, but now with religious credibility. It's exactly what Theodora's been unknowingly preparing for. Her conversion isn't ending her public life. It's about to launch her into the imperial court. The bearkeeper's daughter is going home as something new. Leaving Alexandria is harder than arriving. Theodora has found peace here. Real peace, for the first time in her life. But Macedonia's words won't leave her alone. She could stay, become a religious teacher, live quietly, or she could return to Constantinople and test whether her transformation is strong enough to survive that world. Timothy gives her his blessing, but also a warning. The city will try to make you who you were, he says. Remember who you've become. She packs light. A few books, her baptismal garment, and something else, a new kind of confidence. The ship to Constantinople is nothing like her desperate flight to Alexandria. This time, she's not running from something, she's moving toward it. During the voyage, other passengers recognize her, but their whispers don't sting like they used to. She's not the same woman who left. She prays every morning, studies every afternoon, watches the sea, and thinks about the impossible distance she's travelled. Not just geographically. The notorious performer is returning home as what exactly? She's not sure yet. But whatever it is, it's powerful, it's dangerous, and it's about to change everything. Constantinople's harbour appears on the horizon, and Theodora feels it in her gut. Something's waiting for her here. Not just opportunity, destiny. She's carrying more than new religious knowledge. She's carrying proof that complete transformation is possible, that the lowest can become the highest, that a woman written off as worthless can reinvent herself so completely that empires will bend around her will. The city looks the same, but she knows it will never be the same again. Neither will she. What's coming next will test everything Alexandria taught her, and somehow she's ready for it. Captivating an emperor. Constantinople, 527 AD. Theodora steps off the ship from Alexandria, and she's different. Gone is the desperate performer who fled the capital in shame. This woman carries herself like nobility. Her conversion wasn't just spiritual, it transformed everything about her. The way she moves, the way she speaks, even her silence has weight now. She's learned something in those monasteries, something about power that goes deeper than skin and spectacle. And when word spreads that Theodora's back, the entire Byzantine court holds its breath. Justinian sees her at a reception. Just sees her. And everything stops. This isn't the reckless heir to the throne grabbing whatever catches his eye. This is a man falling hard. Theodora's not even the most beautiful woman in the room, but she's magnetic in a way that makes everyone else fade. She listens when others speak, really listens, then responds with intelligence that cuts through political nonsense like a blade. Justinian, future emperor of Rome, is completely out of his depth, and he knows it. He starts visiting her constantly, bringing gifts, not jewelry, books, philosophical treatises, religious texts, because Theodora challenges his mind, not just his desires. They debate theology until dawn, argue about legal reforms. She critiques his policies with insights that make his advisors look like amateurs. This woman, who once performed with geese, is now discussing imperial strategy with the future emperor and winning most of the arguments. Justinian's falling deeper every conversation. His court thinks he's lost his mind. The obsession becomes total. Justinian cancels meetings to spend time with her, ignores suitable marriage prospects from noble families. His uncle Emperor Justin starts panicking. This isn't just romance, it's political suicide. Marrying an ex-performer would destroy the dynasty's credibility, but Justinian doesn't care about credibility. He's found his intellectual equal, his spiritual match, his everything. The problem? Roman law specifically forbids senators from marrying actresses, even ex-actresses, even reformed ones. The law is absolute, non-negotiable. Until now. Here's where it gets insane. Justinian decides to change the law, not bend it, not find a loophole, change it. We're talking about Roman law, the foundation of Western legal tradition, laws that hadn't been touched in centuries. But love makes emperors do impossible things. Justinian drafts new legislation. Former actresses who've proven their virtue can marry anyone, including senators, including future emperors. The legal scholars are horrified. The aristocracy is furious. Justinian signs it anyway. Love just rewrote the empire. The Senate fights it. Of course they do. Allowing performers into their ranks destroys everything they believe about bloodlines and breeding. But Justinian's not just any senator. He's the heir apparent. When he threatens to marry Theodora regardless, with or without legal sanction, they realize he's serious. Dead serious. This isn't a phase. It's not political theatre. The man would rather start a constitutional crisis than lose this woman, so they cave. The law passes. Roman tradition bends to Byzantine love. 529 AD. The wedding happens, and it's magnificent. Not some quiet ceremony to minimize scandal, a full imperial celebration. Theodora walks down that aisle, knowing she's made history. The former bearkeeper's daughter is marrying into the most powerful dynasty on earth. The crowd watches a woman who once stripped for coins, now wearing purple silk, worth more than entire estates. She's not just joining the royal family, she's transforming it, forever. The impossible has become inevitable. When Justinian becomes emperor in 527, Theodora becomes empress, not just in name, in power. Real power. She attends state meetings, influences policy decisions. Foreign ambassadors treat her as an equal ruler, not a decorative wife. This shocks everyone. Empresses were supposed to be silent, beautiful ornaments. Theodora rewrites that script too. She's actively governing the Byzantine Empire alongside her husband. The performer has become one of the most powerful women in the world, and she uses that power brilliantly. Theodora champions laws protecting women from forced prostitution, laws that come from lived experience. She establishes convents for former performers wanting to start over. She influences religious policy, diplomatic relations, even military strategy. The woman who once lived at society's bottom now protects others trapped there. This isn't just personal transformation, it's systematic change. Theodora's rewriting the empire's moral code from the throne room. Think about the scope of this transformation. 15 years earlier, Theodora was performing acts so explicit they scandalized even jaded Constantinople audiences. Now she's empress of the known world. She went from entertaining crowds for coins to commanding armies and influencing religious doctrine. The journey from Hippodrome to throne room represents maybe the most dramatic social climb in recorded history, and it happened because one man loved her enough to rewrite the law. Justinian's love didn't just change Theodora's life, it changed the nature of imperial power itself. By marrying her, he proved that capability mattered more than breeding, that intelligence could overcome origins, that love could literally rewrite law. Theodora would go on to save the empire during the Nika riots, but that's another chapter. For now, just marvel at this, a bearkeeper's daughter convinced the most powerful man on earth that she was worth breaking tradition, and she was absolutely right. We're leaving Byzantium behind now, jumping forward about 1,000 years to a completely different world. The Ottoman Empire at its peak. 1520s. And here's the thing about empires. They're built on taking things that don't belong to them. Land, wealth, people, especially people. What I'm about to tell you happened to millions across centuries. But this particular girl, this particular abduction, it would change the course of an empire. Her name was Alexandra, but history knows her as Roxelana. Picture this, a small village in what's now western Ukraine. Rolling hills, Orthodox churches with onion domes, the kind of place where everyone knows everyone, where the biggest excitement might be a wedding or a harvest festival. Alexandra's father was an Orthodox priest. Decent family, not wealthy, but respected. She's about 15 years old, learning to read, which was rare for girls back then, helping her mother with household duties, planning for a future that probably involved marrying a local boy, raising children, living quietly. Then came the day that changed everything. Spring morning, 1520-something. The exact date's lost to history, but we know it was during raiding season. That's what they called it, raiding season. Like it was harvest time, but for human beings. The Crimean Tatars worked for the Ottomans, sweeping through Ukrainian and Polish villages, collecting people like crops. No warning, just thundering hooves at dawn. Alexandra probably heard them coming before she saw them. That sound, it meant your life was over. The raid lasted maybe an hour. That's all it took to destroy hundreds of lives. They took the young, the healthy, the valuable ones, left the rest. Alexandra watched her world burn. Literally, these raiders torched what they couldn't carry. Her father's church, her family home, her future. She was chained to maybe 50 other captives, mostly girls and young women. The march south began immediately. No looking back, no goodbyes, no hope of rescue. Just the first steps of a 1,000-mile journey to a slave market. The journey to the slave markets took weeks. Marching during the day, sleeping in chains at night. Alexandra watched some of the other captives break completely. Others seemed to turn inward, like they were protecting some inner flame from being extinguished. She was somewhere in between, terrified, sure, but also, and this is important, already calculating, already watching her captors for patterns, learning their language, understanding their hierarchy. Even in chains, even in despair, part of her was studying how power worked in this new world. Istanbul's slave market was like nothing she could have imagined. The smell hit you first. Unwashed bodies, fear, the sweet smoke from food vendors selling to buyers. Hundreds of people displayed like livestock. Children clinging to mothers who might be sold separately. Men in silk robes examining captives like they were buying horses. Testing teeth, checking for diseases. Alexandra stood there, still wearing the torn dress from her village, trying to process that this was real, that she was property now, that someone would buy her. The Ottoman slave system was massive. Hundreds of thousands of captives flowing through these markets every year. Most ended up in households, fields, workshops. But the really beautiful ones, the young women who caught the right eye, they might end up in a harem. And there were levels to this hell. Household harems for wealthy merchants, provincial governors' harems, and at the very top, the Sultan's harem in Topkapi Palace. That's where they took Alexandra, not because she was the most beautiful girl in the market, but because someone saw something else in her. Walking through the gates of Topkapi Palace must have felt like entering another universe. Marble courtyards, fountains, gardens that looked like paradise. And then, the harem. 400 rooms housing maybe 800 women, all of them captives, technically, all of them competing for the attention of one man. Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent, the most powerful ruler on earth. Alexandra was just another Ukrainian peasant girl now. No name, no history, no identity beyond whatever the harem keepers decided to give her. The first weeks were brutal. Learning the rules, the hierarchy, who you could speak to, who you couldn't, how to avoid the wrong kind of attention from the older women who'd been there for years. Some of these girls went mad from homesickness. Others gave up completely, becoming invisible shadows in silk robes. But Alexandra, she started doing what she'd done during the journey, watching, learning, figuring out how this system worked. Because even here, especially here, understanding power was the only path to survival. Here's what she figured out quickly. The harem wasn't just about beauty. It was about intelligence, personality, the ability to be interesting when the Sultan was bored, comforting when he was troubled, passionate when he needed passion. Most girls never got the chance to show those qualities. They remained nameless servants, but a very few, caught the Sultan's eye. And once you had his attention, everything changed. The question was whether Alexandra had what it took to get noticed in a palace full of extraordinary women. What happened next would break every rule in Ottoman history. But first, Alexandra had to survive, had to navigate the deadly politics between women who saw each other as threats, had to learn Ottoman Turkish, Islamic customs, palace protocol, had to transform herself from a Ukrainian priest's daughter into someone worthy of an emperor's attention. The girl who'd lost everything was about to discover something terrifying and wonderful. Sometimes losing everything is the first step to gaining everything. But the price was becoming someone completely different. The harem's hierarchy. Picture this: 300 women, one palace, one sultan, and a system so brutal it makes medieval courts look like Sunday school. The Ottoman harem wasn't some romantic fantasy. It was a political machine designed to produce heirs and destroy anyone who got in the way. Every woman here had one goal: survive long enough to matter. Most didn't. The lucky ones got forgotten. The unlucky ones, they disappeared in ways that made forgetting seem merciful. Roxelana just walked into this world. At the top sat the Sultan's mother, the valid Sultan. She controlled everything. Who got to see Sultan? Who got pregnant? Who lived? Below her, the 4 official wives, the Kadın Efendis. Then the favourites, the Iqbals. Each rank with its own apartments, servants, allowances. The pecking order was everything. Step out of line, you'd find yourself scrubbing floors in some forgotten corner of the palace. Or worse, at the very bottom, hundreds of girls like Roxelana, odalisques, literally meaning room girls, invisible until proven otherwise. Roxelana starts with nothing. No allies, no protection. Just a quick mind and whatever beauty survived the slave markets. In the harem, beauty wasn't enough. Everyone was beautiful. The competition was insane. Girls would poison each other's cosmetics, slip glass into rivals' food, spread rumours that could get someone strangled with a silk cord. The eunuchs who ran the place. They had their favourites too. Cross them, and you'd never get within a mile of the Sultan. This wasn't survival of the fittest, it was survival of the smartest. Here's what most people don't get about the harem. It wasn't just about sex, it was about politics. Every pregnancy was a potential succession crisis. Every son born meant other mothers had to eliminate the threat, or watch their own kids die. The Ottoman succession law was brutal. When a new sultan took power, he could legally execute all his half-brothers. So mothers weren't just competing for favour, they were literally fighting for their children's lives. Stakes don't get higher than that, and Roxelana was walking into this bloodbath completely blind. But she learns fast, really fast. First rule, never trust anyone completely. Second rule, information is currency. Who's pregnant? Who's fallen from favour? Which eunuch controls which door? Roxelana starts collecting secrets like a magpie. She befriends the right servant girls, the ones who empty the chamber pots and change the sheets. They see everything, hear everything, a whispered conversation about the Sultan's mood, a spotted nightgown that means someone's not pregnant anymore, details that could save your life or end someone else's. She becomes a student of power. The eunuchs controlled access to Suleiman, but they had weaknesses too. Some wanted gold, others craved influence. A few, they just wanted to feel important. Roxelana figures out who wants what. She starts trading favours. A smile for one eunuch who controls the bath schedules. A compliment for another who decides the music lessons. Nothing too obvious. Nothing that screams ambition. Just a Ukrainian girl trying to survive. But every small favour is an investment. Every conversation is intelligence gathering. She's building a network without anyone realising it. Then comes the education. Languages, poetry, music, dancing, but also Ottoman history, Islamic law, court protocol. Most girls treated these lessons like chores. Roxelana treated them like weapons training. She learned Turkish faster than anyone expected, started reading Persian poetry, memorized the genealogies of every important family. While other girls gossiped about jewelry and perfumes, she studied power structures, who owed favors to whom, which families were rising, which ones were about to fall. Knowledge became her armor in a place where weakness meant death. The first time she sees Suleiman, pure chance. He's walking through a garden she wasn't supposed to be in. She drops to the ground immediately. Protocol demands it, but something makes him stop. Maybe her red hair catching the sunlight. Maybe the way she kept perfectly still instead of trembling like most girls would. He asks her name. She answers in perfect Turkish. No accent. He's surprised. Most odalisques barely speak the language. This Ukrainian peasant girl just impressed the most powerful man in the world, and she knows it. That's when everything changes. After that first meeting, Roxana starts getting noticed. Small privileges, better quarters, nicer clothes, but she's smart enough to know this makes her a target. The other girls watch her now, some with envy, others with calculation. She could disappear any night. Accident in the baths, food poisoning, a fall down some stairs. So she starts building protection, allies among the servants, friendships with girls who have nothing to lose, information networks that extend beyond the harem walls. She's not just surviving anymore, she's playing the game, and she's getting good at it. Months pass. Roxelana rises through the ranks. Not the fastest rise, that would be suspicious, but steady, calculated. Each promotion earned through careful maneuvering. She becomes an Iqbal, a recognized favorite, gets her own apartment, her own servants. More importantly, regular access to Suleiman, and that's when she realizes something that changes everything. The Sultan isn't just attracted to her body, he's drawn to her mind. They talk about poetry, politics, philosophy. She's not just another pretty face in his collection. She's become his intellectual companion, his confidante. Now comes the moment that will define her entire future. Suleiman starts hinting about something unprecedented, something that has never happened in Ottoman history. He's thinking about marriage, real marriage, not just elevating her to first wife status, but actually freeing her from slavery and making her his legal equal. The other women in the harem would riot. His advisors would call it political suicide. His mother, she'd probably try to have Roxelana killed. But if she could pull this off, she wouldn't just be surviving the harem anymore. She'd be ruling it, breaking every rule. Picture this. You're the most powerful man in the world. Sultan of the Ottoman Empire. Your word is literally law. You can have anything, anyone, whenever you want. But there's one thing you can't do. One rule even you can't break. Sultans don't marry their slaves. It's been that way for centuries. Your ancestors would roll over in their graves. Your advisors would revolt. Your empire might crumble. So naturally, Sultan decides to do exactly that. 1534. Suleiman has been Sultan for 14 years. He's conquered half of Europe. He's the nightmare that keeps Christian kings awake at night. And he's completely hopelessly in love with a Ukrainian slave girl named Roxelana. Not just bedroom love, real love. The kind that makes you rewrite the rules of your empire. The kind that makes you say, I don't care what my great-grandfather would think. The kind that changes history. He's going to marry her. The announcement hits the Ottoman court like a thunderbolt. Palace officials are speechless. Janissaries whisper in the barracks. Provincial governors send urgent messages to Constantinople asking if the rumours are true. Because this isn't just breaking tradition, this is shattering it. No Ottoman sultan has ever married a slave. Not once, in 3 centuries. Your concubines bear your children, sure, but marry them? Make them your legal equal? Your queen? Absolutely not. Until now. Here's what makes this so explosive. In Ottoman law, marriage means partnership. It means your wife has rights, legal standing, political voice. Concubines are property. Wives are people. And Suleiman just declared that his favourite slave isn't a slave anymore. He's freeing her. All of her, not just her body, but her legal status, her social rank, her future. Roxelana is about to become the first and only queen in Ottoman history. The transformation is staggering. Yesterday, Roxelana was property, someone Suleiman owned, like his horses or his jewels. Today, she's his equal partner. She goes from having no legal existence to being the second most powerful person in the empire, from invisible to invincible. Think about that leap, from auction block to throne room in 20 years. And now, with this marriage, she's locked it in permanently. No going back. Ottoman society is losing its mind. This goes against everything they understand about how the world works. Sultans don't fall in love with their property. They use it, they collect it, they display it. But marry it. Make it their equal. The very idea is ridiculous, dangerous, revolutionary. Foreign ambassadors are writing frantic reports home. Christian Europe is watching in fascination. What happens when the most powerful Muslim ruler in the world starts breaking his own rules for love? For 3 centuries, Ottoman succession had been predictable. The Sultan has concubines. They have sons. The strongest son becomes the next Sultan. Clean, simple, brutal, but clear. Now, Roxelana's children aren't just royal bastards anymore. They're legitimate heirs, born to a legal wife. That changes everything. The palace politics, the succession, the balance of power. One marriage ceremony just rewrote the rules of empire. But here's the thing, this isn't just political calculation. Suleiman is genuinely desperately in love. His letters to Roxelana are pure poetry. He calls her his light, his life, his heart's joy. This is a man who commands armies writing love letters like a teenager. My springtime, my merry-faced love, my daytime, my sweetheart, laughing leaf. Yeah, the Sultan of the Ottoman Empire wrote that, about his former slave, and meant every word. The political implications are massive. Roxelana isn't just a wife now, she's a queen, and queens have power, real power. She starts corresponding with foreign rulers, making political alliances, funding charitable projects, building mosques. She's not hiding in the harem anymore. She's operating as Suleiman's partner in running the empire. The slave girl from Ukraine is now making decisions that affect millions of people across 3 continents. The other concubines? They're watching their world collapse. The hierarchy they understood, the system they navigated, the rules they learned, all gone. Roxelana just broke the ceiling above them all. She proved that a slave could become a queen, that love could trump tradition, that the impossible was just possible. Some of them probably hated her. Others probably worshipped her. All of them definitely feared her. And this is just the beginning. Roxelana isn't content to be a revolutionary queen. She's going to be a transformative one. Her influence will reshape Ottoman court life for generations. She'll change how the empire deals with Europe, how it thinks about women, how it operates at the highest levels. The Ukrainian priest's daughter who was sold in a slave market, she's about to leave her mark on history in ways that will echo for centuries. Balthild's journey. Picture a teenage girl, chained in the bottom of a boat, crossing the English Channel. Anglo-Saxon. Maybe noble blood running through her veins. Doesn't matter now. She's cargo, property. Headed to Frankish territory, where everything she knew, her language, her gods, her identity, means nothing. This is around 641. The slave trade across the Channel is booming. Young women especially. They fetch good prices in Frankish markets. Balthild doesn't know it yet, but she's about to become one of the most powerful women in medieval Europe. We don't know exactly how they took her. Raiders hitting the coast? A planned raid on her family's estate? What we do know is she was young, probably around 15, old enough to work, young enough to break. The Anglo-Saxon kingdoms were constantly at war with each other. Easy pickings for slave traders who knew which ports to hit, which families had daughters worth stealing. One day she's living whatever life she knew. The next, waking up in chains with strange men speaking a language she doesn't understand. That boat ride across the Channel. Imagine it, cramped below deck with other captives. The smell of fear and sickness, no idea where they're taking her. No idea if she'll ever see home again. These weren't pleasure cruises. They packed people like livestock. Some didn't survive the crossing. The lucky ones just vomited for days. Balthild endured every hour of it, watching the English coastline disappear forever. When they dragged her up on deck, she was looking at Francia, a completely foreign world where her nightmare was just beginning. The slave market was brutal efficiency. They cleaned her up first, made her presentable. Buyers wanted to see what they were purchasing, checked her teeth, her hands, tested her strength. Balthild stood there while strangers discussed her value in a language she was starting to pick up through sheer terror. Then this man steps forward, urchin old, powerful Frankish lord, mayor of the palace, basically the guy who ran things when the king was busy. He looked at this Anglo-Saxon girl and saw something. He bought her on the spot. Her new reality hit fast. Urchin Old's household was massive. Dozens of servants, slaves, retainers. Everyone had a place in the hierarchy. Balthild started at the bottom, scrubbing floors, hauling water, learning Frankish words through necessity and beatings. But here's what's interesting. She was smart. Really smart. She figured out the household politics quickly. Who to avoid, who might help her, how to stay invisible when she needed to. Because staying invisible was about to become a survival skill she desperately needed. Urchin Old noticed her. Of course he did. She was young, probably beautiful, and completely under his control. In the medieval world, this was considered normal. Masters using female slaves however they wanted. It was legal, expected even. But Balthild, she wasn't going to accept this quietly. When Urchin Old started making his intentions clear, she did something that could have gotten her killed. She resisted, not openly, not stupidly, but she found ways to avoid him, to disappear when he came looking, to make herself unavailable without directly defying him. Her evasion tactics were brilliant. She'd volunteer for the worst jobs that kept her away from the main house. Cleaning stables, working in the kitchens during his meal times. She learned his schedule and made sure she was always somewhere else. When other servants tried to warn her that she was playing with fire, she just smiled and kept dodging. This wasn't just about protecting her body. This was about protecting something deeper, her sense of self, her refusal to be completely broken by what had happened to her. The household knew what was happening. Everyone could see Urchin Old's frustration growing. Here was this slave girl, this property, somehow staying one step ahead of him. Other slaves were terrified for her. Masters who got publicly embarrassed by their property didn't usually respond well. But Balthild had calculated something important. Erchinoald needed his reputation intact. If he forced himself on her violently, people would talk. If he killed her for defying him, people would notice. So she stayed just inside the boundaries of what he could tolerate. Meanwhile, she was learning everything she could about Frankish court life. How power worked, who had influence, what the political tensions were. Remember, Erchinoald wasn't just some lord. He was deeply connected to the royal family. Important people visited his house constantly. Balthild watched them all, listened to their conversations, picked up not just the language, but the subtle art of medieval politics. She was preparing herself for something, even if she didn't know what yet, just preparing. Her breakthrough came when Erchinoald finally gave up and married someone else. Someone appropriate, someone of his own class. Balthild had outlasted him. She'd preserved herself through pure stubbornness and clever manoeuvring, but now what? She was still a slave, still property, still trapped in this foreign land with no way home. Except, she'd proven something to herself during those months of hiding and dodging. She was smarter than the people who owned her. She could survive anything they threw at her. What Balthild didn't know was that her reputation was spreading beyond Erchinoald's household. People had heard about the Anglo-Saxon slave girl who somehow managed to resist one of the most powerful men in Francia without getting herself killed. That took intelligence, courage, political instincts you can't teach. Those qualities were about to catch the attention of someone even more powerful than Erchinoald, someone who could change her life completely. But that's a story for the next part of our tale. Hiding from the master. Balthild knew the sound of his footsteps, heavy boots on stone floors, the particular rhythm when he was looking for her, versus when he was just passing through. She'd learned to read the household like a survival manual, which servants would cover for her, which rooms stayed empty during certain hours, where to hide when those boots started moving with purpose. Because Erchinoald wasn't just her master anymore, he wanted more, and in 7th century Francia, a slave girl had exactly 0 ways to say no. Picture this nightmare: your property, completely. Your owner decides he wants you in his bed, and there's no law, no authority, no protection that says he can't have you. That was Balthild's reality every single day. Erchinoald had brought her to work, but somewhere along the way, he'd started seeing her differently. Maybe it was her unusual beauty, maybe her obvious intelligence, maybe just the simple fact that she was there, vulnerable, and his. Whatever triggered it, she was now prey in her own home. But here's what's remarkable about Balthild. She fought back. Not with weapons or open defiance. That would have been suicide. She fought with her mind. When he summoned her to private quarters, she'd suddenly remember urgent tasks elsewhere. Kitchen fires that needed tending, messages that absolutely had to be delivered. She became a master of creative emergencies. Always polite, always apologetic, always slipping away just when he thought he had her cornered. It was psychological warfare disguised as household management. The other servants started helping. They could see what was happening. Maybe they recognized something of themselves in her desperation, or maybe they just respected her cleverness. When Erchinoald asked where Balthild was, suddenly everyone had different answers. She's in the storerooms. She's with the cook. She's tending to the sick child next door. A conspiracy of the powerless, buying her precious minutes, precious hours. Small rebellions that could have cost them everything if they'd been caught. But you can't run forever in a world where you're owned. Erchinoald was getting impatient. His requests were becoming demands. His suggestions were becoming threats. The household tension was rising like water behind a dam. Everyone could feel it building. Balthild was running out of excuses, running out of places to hide, running out of time. The mathematics of slavery were simple and brutal. He owned her. Eventually he would collect what he believed he was owed. Then something unexpected happened. Politics intervened. Erchinoald needed an alliance, a marriage that would strengthen his position in the Frankish court. Not with a slave girl, no matter how beautiful or clever. He needed a wife with connections, with land, with a family name that meant something. Business trumped desire. The same brutal pragmatism that had trapped Balthild suddenly became her salvation. He stopped hunting her through the corridors and started negotiating dowries instead. The relief must have been overwhelming. Months of constant vigilance, constant fear, constantly looking over her shoulder, and suddenly it was over. Erchinoald married his political bride, and lost interest in forcing himself on his slaves. Balthild had won a game she'd never chosen to play, but victory in 7th century Francia didn't mean freedom, it just meant survival. She was still property, still vulnerable, still completely dependent on the whims of masters who could destroy her without consequence. But something had changed in Balthild during those months of hiding. She'd learned she could think her way out of impossible situations. She'd discovered that intelligence could be a weapon even when you had no physical power. She'd built alliances among the powerless. Most importantly, she'd refused to break. Many slaves would have simply submitted, accepted their fate, given up. Balthild had fought every single day. That strength, that refusal to surrender, it was going to serve her well, because her story was far from over. While she'd been learning to survive in Erchinoald's household, the political landscape of Francia was shifting. Kings were dying, new alliances were forming, and opportunities were opening for people clever enough to see them. Balthild had proven she could navigate dangerous waters. Soon, much more dangerous waters were coming, but she'd also proven something else. She wasn't just surviving anymore, she was learning to win. Word of the beautiful, intelligent Anglo-Saxon slave was spreading beyond Erchinoald's household. In a world where noble marriages were political transactions, people noticed unusual women, they talked about them, and sometimes those conversations reached the ears of kings. Young King Clovis II was looking for a wife, not necessarily a political marriage this time, maybe someone different, someone who'd proven her worth through trials instead of inheritance, someone like the slave girl who'd outsmarted one of his most powerful lords. Balthild had no idea that her reputation was travelling up the social ladder. She was probably just grateful to walk the halls without fear, to sleep without listening for footsteps, to work without constantly planning escape routes. But fate was preparing something extraordinary. The same intelligence that had saved her from Erchinoald's bed was about to lift her to heights she'd never imagined. From hiding in corners to ruling a kingdom, the transformation was about to begin. Catherine the Peasant. Lithuania, 1684. A baby girl is born to peasants who can barely feed themselves. No title, no dowry, no prospects beyond scrubbing floors and birthing children, until she dies young from overwork. Her name? Martha. Not Catherine yet, that comes later. Right now she's just another mouth to feed in a world where peasant children die as easily as winter frost kills flowers. But here's what nobody knows yet. This baby, born into absolute nothing, will someday hold the crown of the largest empire on earth. Age 3. Both parents dead. Martha's an orphan now, passed between relatives who see her as a burden. Picture this kid, barefoot, hungry, sleeping on straw, wearing rags that barely cover her. She's learning to survive before she can properly walk, begging for scraps, dodging blows. This is the school that teaches her how to read people, how to make herself useful, how to charm her way into an extra piece of bread, skills that will serve an empress. But first, she has to survive childhood. 1702. Martha's 18. Russia is expanding, conquering everything in sight. Peter the Great's armies sweep through the Baltic, taking fortress after fortress. They hit Marienburg, where Martha's working as a servant. The Russians storm in. Chaos, screaming, houses burning, and Martha, she's captured. Property of the Russian Empire now. Shipped off like cargo to serve in the household of some government official she's never met. from Lithuanian peasant to Russian slave in one terrifying day. Her old life gone forever. So now Martha's scrubbing floors in the house of Boris Sheremetev, one of Peter's top generals. She can't read, can't write, speaks broken Russian with a thick accent. Just another foreign servant girl sweeping up after her betters. But watch her. She's learning the language fast, listening to conversations, understanding how power works in this household, making herself indispensable, because Martha's figured out something crucial. Beauty and charm can be weapons, even for a peasant girl who owns nothing but the dress on her back. And then, everything changes. Peter the Great visits Sheremetev's house, the Tsar of Russia, 6 feet 8 inches of absolute power, covered in scars from building ships with his own hands. He notices Martha immediately. Maybe it's her laugh, maybe it's how she moves through the room like she belongs there. Or maybe it's simpler than that. She's beautiful, and Peter's always been weak for beautiful women, but this time feels different. This peasant girl with calloused hands and bright eyes, she captivates him completely. Peter starts finding excuses to visit Sheremetev more often, always asking for Martha to serve him personally. And here's what's brilliant about her. She doesn't throw herself at him like the court ladies do. She's respectful, but not servile, warm, but not desperate. She makes him laugh. More importantly, she listens when he talks about his dreams for Russia. This illiterate peasant girl somehow understands what drives him. She becomes his confidante, his escape from the pressures of ruling an empire, his peace. Their relationship deepens. Martha's not just Peter's lover now, she's his advisor. He talks through military strategies with her, shares his frustrations about stubborn nobles who resist his reforms. And Martha? She gives him the kind of honest feedback that emperors rarely hear. No political agenda, no family connections to protect. Just a peasant woman who genuinely cares about this complicated, brilliant, sometimes brutal man. She grounds him, makes him more human, and Peter realizes he can't imagine ruling without her. 1707. Peter makes a decision that shocks the Russian court. He's going to marry Martha. Not some German princess, not a boyar's daughter, a Lithuanian peasant who can't even sign her own name. The nobles are horrified. This violates every rule about imperial marriages. But Peter doesn't care. He converts Martha to Orthodox Christianity, gives her the name Catherine, and marries her in secret. Then again publicly, because love, apparently, trumps politics. Even when you're Tsar of Russia. Even when your bride used to scrub floors. Catherine, that's what we call her now, becomes Peter's empress. The peasant girl, who once begged for bread, now wears the crown of Russia. But here's the thing, she never forgets where she came from. While other empresses focus on court intrigue and fashion, Catherine stays close to Peter's side. She travels with him on military campaigns, nurses him through illnesses, shares his vision of transforming Russia from a backward kingdom into a modern European power. She's not just wearing the crown, she's earning it. And Catherine proves herself repeatedly. During Peter's Persian campaign, she organizes supply lines. When he's building St. Petersburg from swampland, she's right there in the mud with him. She becomes fluent in Russian and German, learns to read and write, masters court etiquette without losing her natural warmth. The woman who started life as an orphan peasant transforms herself into everything an empress should be. Smart, diplomatic, tough as iron, but most importantly, she keeps Peter grounded when power threatens to consume him completely. 1725. Peter dies suddenly, and Catherine faces her greatest test yet. The nobles who never accepted her see their chance to push her aside, choose a male heir instead. But Catherine's learned too much about power to give it up quietly. She's spent 20 years watching Peter rule, absorbing every lesson about statecraft and survival. The scared peasant girl is gone. In her place stands an empress who knows exactly how dangerous and lonely power can be, and exactly how much she's willing to sacrifice to keep it. The empress who freed thousands. Balthild had done what seemed impossible. She'd gone from Anglo-Saxon slave to Queen of Nostria. But here's what gets me about her story. She didn't just escape slavery. She decided to end it. Picture this. A woman who'd been bought and sold, who'd hidden from her master's advances, now sits on a throne, and her first major act, abolishing Christian slavery throughout the entire kingdom. Think about that power dynamic for a second. This wasn't just symbolic. Balthild's decree freed thousands of Christian slaves across Frankish territory. We're talking about people who'd been captured in raids, sold at markets, forced into labour. The same fate she'd narrowly escaped. She understood what it meant to be property, to have no control over your own body, your own future. And now she had the power to change that for others. Revolutionary doesn't begin to cover it. But wait, there's more to this. Balthild didn't just free existing slaves. She banned the practice entirely. No more Christian slave markets in her realm. No more raids targeting Christian communities for human trafficking. This was economic warfare against an entire industry. Slave trading was profitable. Powerful people made fortunes from it. And she just shut it down. A former slave telling slave traders their business was over. The political implications were massive. Slavery wasn't just labour, it was how you displayed wealth, how you punished enemies, how you rewarded allies. Balthild's abolition upended centuries of tradition. She compensated some slave owners, but the message was clear. Human trafficking stops here. Now, end of discussion. Can you imagine the resistance she faced? The pushback from nobles who'd built their fortunes on buying and selling people. This is where her story gets complicated. Balthild ruled with an iron fist. She had to. You don't dismantle an entire economic system by asking nicely. She appointed bishops who supported her reforms, removed those who didn't, built alliances with monasteries that freed slaves, used every tool of royal power to enforce her vision. Some called her a saint, others called her tyrannical. Both were probably right. Her methods weren't always gentle. Balthild understood that lasting change required institutional support. She funded monasteries that would continue freeing slaves after her death, promoted clergy who preached against human trafficking, created legal frameworks that made slavery harder to justify. This wasn't just royal whim, it was systematic transformation. She was engineering a society where what happened to her couldn't happen to others. Then came the darker accusations. After her husband Clovis died, Balthild served as regent for her young son. That's when things got messy. Critics claimed she had bishops killed. 9 of them. Were they obstructing her reforms, plotting against her regency? We don't know the full truth. Medieval politics were brutal. Queens didn't survive by being passive. Maybe she ordered those deaths. Maybe she didn't. Either way, her enemies remembered. The bishop accusations followed a pattern. Medieval chroniclers loved painting powerful women as either saints or demons, rarely anything in between. Balthild was too complex for their narratives. A former slave who freed slaves, saintly. A queen who possibly ordered assassinations, demonic. They couldn't reconcile both truths in one person, so they wrote contradictory accounts that survive to this day, history through a lens of confusion. Here's what we know for certain. Opposition to her regency grew. Political pressure mounted. Around 665, Balthild was forced to retire to a convent. Some sources say she chose this, others suggest she was pushed out. Either way, her active political career was over. She spent her final years in religious life, still remembered for freeing slaves, but no longer wielding royal power. The system had finally contained her. Then something remarkable happened. Decades after her death, the Catholic Church declared Balthild a saint. Saint Balthild, the slave who became queen, who freed thousands, who maybe ordered bishops killed, officially recognized as holy. Her feast day is January 30th. They chose to remember the liberator, not the alleged assassin, history's ultimate verdict on a woman who refused to let her origins define her destiny. So now we've met them all. Theodora the performer, Roxelana the captive, Catherine the peasant, and Balthild the trafficked. 4 women separated by centuries and continents, yet connected by impossible transformations, from auction blocks to thrones, from property to power. What made these transformations possible? What patterns emerge when we examine their lives together? That's what we're exploring next. The common threads that unite these extraordinary stories, common threads of survival. 5 women, 4 empires, 1,000 years of history. Theodora, Roxelana, Balthild, Catherine, and the unnamed millions who never made it out. But what connected these survivors? What invisible thread runs through a Byzantine bearkeeper's daughter, a Ukrainian priest's child, an Anglo-Saxon trafficking victim, and a Lithuanian orphan? It wasn't luck. It wasn't coincidence. These women shared something deeper, a combination of traits so rare, so perfectly calibrated for survival, that they could transform chains into crowns. Let's break down exactly what made them different. First, intelligence. Not book learning. Street smarts. Theodora reading the Hippodrome crowd's mood before each performance. Roxana learning Ottoman court politics, while pretending to be just another concubine. Balthild memorizing her master's routines to avoid his advances. Catherine absorbing Russian customs she couldn't even read about. They were information collectors, pattern readers. Every conversation was data. Every interaction taught them something about power, because when you own nothing, knowledge becomes your only currency, and they spent it brilliantly. Beauty, but not the way you think. Sure, they were physically attractive, that got them noticed. But real beauty, that's performance. Theodora knew exactly how to move on stage. Roxelana understood the art of conversation. Balthild learned to present herself as both desirable and virtuous. Catherine mastered the balance between approachable and regal. They weaponized charm, made themselves unforgettable not just for how they looked, but for how they made powerful men feel. Beauty opened doors. Performance kept them open. Ruthlessness. The trait nobody talks about, because we want them to be pure victims who rose above. But survival at this level requires calculation. Theodora eliminated threats to her position. Roxelana orchestrated the downfall of rival concubines. Balthild allegedly had bishops killed. Catherine navigated Russian court intrigue without a single ally. They understood that mercy was a luxury slaves couldn't afford. When your life depends on staying relevant, you do what's necessary, not cruel for cruelty's sake, ruthless for survival's sake. Resilience. This one's almost impossible to quantify. How do you bounce back from being sold like livestock, from performing sexual acts for crowds, from hiding in closets to avoid rape, from watching your entire world burn? Normal people break. These women bent. Theodora found God in Alexandria. Roxelana found purpose in Ottoman politics. Balthild found meaning in religious devotion. Catherine found identity in Russian transformation. They didn't just survive trauma. They alchemized it into power, turned their worst experiences into their greatest strengths. Resourcefulness. Making something from nothing. Theodora turned scandalous reputation into political asset. Roxelana transformed harem imprisonment into diplomatic headquarters. Balthild converted hiding spots into strategic positioning. Catherine turned illiteracy into mysterious allure. They worked with what they had. No family connections? Build new ones? No education? Learn through listening. No money? Become indispensable. When you start with nothing, everything becomes a potential tool. They saw opportunities where others saw obstacles. Ambition, but again, not the way we usually think about it. This wasn't career climbing, this was existential necessity. Theodora didn't want to be empress for the crown. She wanted never to be powerless again. Roxelana didn't seek queenship for status. She wanted security for her children. Balthild didn't pursue royal marriage for wealth. She wanted agency over her own body. Catherine didn't chase imperial power for glory. She wanted to matter. Their ambition was survival-driven. When you've been property, becoming the owner of your own fate is revolutionary. Will to survive. The hardest trait to define, but maybe the most important. Something inside them simply refused to die, not just physically, spiritually, emotionally. Theodora kept performing when others might have surrendered. Roxelana kept strategizing when others might have accepted their fate. Balthild kept resisting when others might have submitted. Catherine kept learning when others might have given up. They possessed an almost supernatural determination to write their own endings. Death before defeat. Their individual impacts were staggering. Theodora saved the Byzantine Empire with a single speech. Roxelana became the most powerful woman in Ottoman history. Balthild abolished Christian slavery across Francia. Catherine helped transform Russia into a European power. But think about this. Each started as somebody's property. Someone bought and sold them, used them, discarded them, then watched as those same women reshaped entire civilizations. Talk about return on investment. The men who enslaved them accidentally created history's greatest queens. Collectively, they proved something revolutionary, that power isn't hereditary, that transformation is possible from any starting point, that the distance between slave and sovereign isn't unbridgeable. They changed how we think about women's capabilities, about social mobility, about redemption itself. Their stories became templates, proof that the human spirit can survive anything and transform everything. 4 women, across 1,000 years, showing that your beginning doesn't determine your ending, your choices do. How do their stories intertwine? Through the shared understanding that survival requires evolution. That powerlessness teaches you exactly what power looks like. That when you've lost everything, you have nothing left to lose. They're connected by the invisible thread of transformation. Proof that the arc of history doesn't just bend toward justice. Sometimes it bends toward revenge. The best possible revenge. Living well, ruling brilliantly, dying remembered. From auction blocks to history books. That's how you win. The price of power. Power always costs something. For these 5 women, the price was steep. Every crown came with sacrifices that would break most people. Every throne demanded they surrender pieces of themselves they could never reclaim. Tonight we confront the brutal truth behind their transformations, that becoming an empress meant losing something essentially human. The auction block to the throne sounds like triumph, right? But here's what the history books don't tell you about the journey. Theodora paid first. To marry Justinian, she had to publicly renounce her past. Every performance, every mistake, every survival choice she'd made, officially erased, but erasing history and erasing memory, 2 different things. Court whispers followed her everywhere. There goes the actress. Remember what she used to do with those geese. The woman who delivered the speech that saved an empire still heard snickers behind palace doors. Success couldn't silence shame. Power couldn't purchase respect. Roxelana discovered that breaking precedent makes you a target. First woman in Ottoman history to marry a sultan, and every traditionalist hated her for it. They called her a witch, a foreign manipulator. They whispered she'd poisoned Suleiman's mind. Her own son Mustafa turned against her influence. Family dinners became political battlegrounds. Love letters from Suleiman couldn't erase the isolation. When you shatter a 1,000-year tradition, even your victories feel like losses, especially when your children suffer the backlash. Balthild's transformation to sainthood came with accusations of murder. 9 bishops died during her regency. Coincidence or conspiracy? The same nobles she'd once served as a slave now whispered she'd ordered their deaths. Political necessity or personal revenge? History still debates, but imagine living with that weight, every prayer shadowed by doubt, every charitable act questioned as guilt, sainthood and suspicion, strange bedfellows. The woman who abolished slavery across an empire died wondering if power had corrupted her soul. Catherine faced a different humiliation. Illiteracy. She could charm Peter the Great, navigate court politics, survive palace intrigue, but she couldn't read her own imperial decrees. Imagine sitting through council meetings, nodding sagely while ministers read documents you couldn't comprehend. Imagine signing treaties you had to trust others to explain. Raw intelligence carried her far, but in a world that valued education above all else, illiteracy was a constant reminder of her peasant origins. Power couldn't purchase dignity. Loneliness haunted all 5 women. Success isolated them from everyone they'd once known. Old friends became subjects. Equals became servants. Trust became luxury they couldn't afford. Theodora couldn't confide in actresses from her past. Roxelana couldn't return to her Ukrainian village. Balthild couldn't gossip with fellow slaves. Catherine couldn't share a peasant meal with childhood friends. The higher they climbed, the smaller their world became. Absolute power, absolutely alone. That's the paradox of transformation. Success separates you from yourself. Public hatred came with the territory. Every decision sparked criticism. Too merciful? Weak woman? Too harsh? Unnatural monster? Theodora faced riots over her religious policies. Roxelana endured blame for Ottoman military defeats. Balthild's regency sparked noble rebellions. Catherine's foreign birth made her perpetually suspect. Male rulers faced criticism too, but these women carried the extra burden of gender. Every mistake proved women couldn't handle power. Every success was attributed to male advisors. They succeeded despite constant sabotage. Family sacrifices cut deepest. Theodora never had children with Justinian, some historians suspect by choice. The empire needed heirs, but pregnancy would have made her vulnerable. Roxelana watched her sons compete for succession, knowing only one could survive. Balthild entered a convent, abandoning her children to protect her regency. Catherine outlived Peter, ruling alone. Power demanded they choose between personal happiness and political necessity. They chose power, but those choices followed them to their graves. Success tastes bitter when seasoned with regret. The psychological toll was enormous. Imagine carrying the weight of millions while remembering when you were worth nothing. Imagine making life and death decisions when you still flinch at your master's voice. Past trauma doesn't disappear with present success. These women ruled empires while battling internal empires of fear, shame, and doubt. Power couldn't heal childhood wounds. Authority couldn't erase memory. They transformed their circumstances, but carried their scars forever. The auction block never really leaves your mind. It just gets buried under royal purple. Yet somehow they persevered. Every morning they chose to continue. Despite the loneliness, criticism, and crushing responsibility, they kept going. Theodora kept reforming laws. Roxelana kept writing poetry. Balthild kept abolishing slavery. Catherine kept modernizing Russia. Their greatness lay not in avoiding the costs of power, but in paying them willingly. They understood the price, and paid it anyway, because sometimes changing the world requires sacrificing yourself. Sometimes the only way to save others is to lose yourself. That's heroism. The human drama behind these crown jewels reminds us that history's greatest transformations come from history's deepest pain. 5 women who should have died forgotten instead shaped empires, but their victories came wrapped in tragedy. Success shadowed by sacrifice. Triumph tinged with loss. As you drift toward sleep tonight, remember that behind every throne stands a human being who paid more than you can imagine to sit there. These weren't fairy tales, they were human stories, complicated, costly, and ultimately heartbreakingly beautiful. Closing reflection. 5 women, 5 different centuries, 5 impossible journeys from chains to crowns. What do their stories really tell us? It's not just about beating the odds, it's something deeper. Each of these women faced the ultimate test of human resilience. Stripped of everything, dignity, freedom, family, yet somehow they found power in powerlessness, found strength in surviving. And here's what gets me about all this. They didn't just survive, they transformed entire empires. Think about the math here for a second. The statistical impossibility of what happened in societies where women had almost no rights, slaves had 0 rights, yet Theodora rewrote Byzantine law, Roxelana became the only queen in Ottoman history, Balthild abolished slavery across Francia, Catherine charmed her way from peasant hut to Russian throne. These weren't flukes, these were women who understood something profound about power that their contemporaries missed completely. Power, it turns out, isn't always inherited. Sometimes it's earned through suffering. Each woman we've met tonight learnt to read people in ways that noble-born women never had to. When survival depends on understanding exactly what someone wants from you, when one wrong word could mean death, you develop skills that can't be taught in any palace. They became masters of human nature because they had no choice. And redemption. That's the thread that runs through every single story. Not redemption from some external force, but the kind they created for themselves. Theodora transformed from Constantinople's most scandalous performer to its most respected empress. She didn't erase her past, she used it. Turned her experience of being exploited into laws protecting other women. That's not just survival, that's alchemy, turning shame into strength. Survival shaped everything about who they became, but not the way you might think. It wasn't just about staying alive, it was about staying human. Roxelana wrote poetry while navigating harem politics. Balthild established monasteries while ruling a kingdom. Catherine learned to read while transforming Russia. They refused to let brutality make them brutal. Somehow, in the middle of systems designed to break them, they kept their capacity for love. Which brings us to transformation. The real kind. Not just changing circumstances, but changing the very nature of who you are. Each woman became something that had never existed before. Theodora wasn't just an empress, she was a former slave who became an empress. That combination created entirely new possibilities, new ways of seeing the world, new ways of wielding power. They didn't just climb existing ladders, they built new ones. What do these stories reveal about history? That it's messier than we pretend, stranger than we admit. The textbooks tell us about kings and battles, but the real turning points often happened in bedrooms and harems, in quiet conversations between rulers and the women who understood them completely. Power flowed through unofficial channels, through love, through sex, through the kind of emotional intelligence that only comes from having nothing left to lose. And about the human spirit. These women prove something we sometimes forget in our comfortable lives, that people are capable of extraordinary reinvention, that trauma doesn't have to define you, that sometimes the very experiences that should destroy us become the source of our greatest strength. They took the worst thing that could happen to a woman in their time and transformed it into the foundation for unprecedented power. Their lasting legacies aren't just the laws they changed or the empires they influenced. It's the proof they left behind. Proof that transformation is possible from any starting point. That love can rewrite the rules of entire civilizations. That intelligence and resilience matter more than bloodlines. They showed that the bottom of society and the top aren't as far apart as everyone assumes. Sometimes it's just one emperor's heart away. What can we learn from their remarkable lives? That survival isn't just enduring, it's choosing what kind of person you become while you endure. That power isn't about dominating others, It's about understanding them so completely that they want to give you everything. That redemption isn't something that happens to you, it's something you create for yourself, one choice at a time. These women didn't just change history, they proved that history belongs to anyone brave enough to seize it. As you drift towards sleep tonight, carry this with you. 5 women who started as property became the most powerful people of their time, not through violence or inheritance, but through the kind of strength that only comes from having survived the unthinkable. Their stories remind us that transformation is always possible, that love can reshape empires, and that sometimes the greatest power comes from the deepest pain. Rest well, knowing that history belongs to the determined.